What is going on, Babylonians? My name is Songs of Raids and welcome to another video on the channel, and today we're going to be looking at my honest opinion about the game of Outriders, because the video that we put out last Thursday, trying to generate a little bit of positivity in the community for once, trying to get like a nice video together, get a nice like conversation, discussion going on in the comments. While the majority of you I did find out do actually enjoy the game of Outriders, there are still a fair few of you that still don't enjoy it, and don't get me wrong, I understand the hate, I understand your perspectives, because we've had those conversations in the comment section. I mean, I've spent at least 3 hours being able to speak to everyone that did comment on that video. If you are looking to be able to go over to that video, I'll put a link in the video right now. But yeah, if you do want to go over there, you want to be able to put a comment over there, I will still be answering comments on that, so by all means head yourself over there, let me know your actual honest opinion, or feel free to do it on this video as well. Since we found out about that, there has been a little bit of confusion regarding what the general message of the video was to be about, and I understand some people thought I was trying to diss or try to attack Cloud Plays in a sense, and I just want to reiterate that video was not generated with that intention whatsoever. At the end of the day, Cloud Plays has their own views on the game, they have their own opinion, and we don't have any right to be able to try and change that. We don't have any right to be able to say whether they're right or wrong. That is purely their opinion, they're entitled to it, just like we're entitled to our own opinion as well. So the video was just to try and get a little bit of positivity out into the community, and that is purely all it was there for. So I feel like it did achieve that. I feel like we also got to speak to some other people just to find out what they thought, and yeah, it's been fun. I've enjoyed those comment sections, so I would love to be able to start a few more discussions like that in the near future. But yes, this is going to be from the interest of that video from comment section, because people were asking me why I have such an optimistic approach to this game, and that's what this video is going to be about, so let's get into it. So how we're going to structure this is I'm going to look at the pros, the cons, and the quality of life, things I'd like to change for the game to be able to succeed going forward. Now, I do have a decent sized list, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to bullet point it down to the main categories, the things I want to talk about, and keep it nice and concise, because at the end of the day, this is going to be a long video because there's a lot to talk about in terms of how I feel what's good and what's bad and what I'd like to change, but at the end of it, I don't want this to go over an hour. I don't want to bore you to death with any of the details. I just want to be able to categorize it. I want to be able to go into some of the bullet points, and then that is it, and we're just going to leave it at that. And if you fancy asking me any kind of more questions, feel free to head over to the Discord, and I'll always have a nice chat with you there. We're going to kick it off with the pros, what I think are the 5 main things that I feel like Outriders has done correct, what they've done right, and what keeps me coming back playing for more. So number 1 on my list is the overall gameplay and skill choice in the whole is solid. So what I mean by this is things like skill animations, the kind of damage multipliers that you can do and how they all stack up to be able to inflict as much damage as possible, and the mod selection that you can have for your armor and your weaponry. Now, in terms of the skills, I've always been a massive fan as to how they've kind of done their animations, how it all kind of looks and how it all flows. Things like the Devastator really benefit from these kind of things. I love the idea of a class that I've always loved, the Juggernaut from X-Men, and the fact that you can have a class that's designed to be able to break the Earth, or break Enoch in this case, and just, you know, become stone, be that actual Juggernaut that you possibly could be. You know, things like encasing yourself in stone to be able to reduce damage, overall looks amazing when it happens. Earthquake is, you know, it's satisfying, it's almost, it's not realistic, but it is a lot, you know, it's, you can see the animation going, it travels, every single step of that earthquake as it goes, the hit reg on that is pretty damn good. When you do gravity leap and you jump back, you turn yourself into a group of flying stones. That's so wacky, so like wild and all that. I would never have expected that for some kind of skill, especially one that's pronounced to be kind of like the Juggernaut, that's supposed to take the bullets, take the damage, all that kind of thing. The fact that they can disperse themselves into several different stones and float in the air to then come crashing back down and so on. It genuinely amazes me, and I genuinely feel like they did put a lot of work and a lot of love into the skills, and it really does show. The mods, you know, overall, the fact that you can tailor a skill to be anything from increasing more damage to debuffing to applying status, things along those lines, being able to apply Golem to your own teammates, that's quite fun. It's not overall viable, but it is, you know, if you were to go and try and make some kind of strange class, or you wanted to be able to be the protector for your team, Golem and having that mod would be a lot of fun. You could protect your lower level teammates if they wanted to have like a bit of a blast, and you could just be a support role just by doing that. On the offense, you could then go for Earthquake and Gravity Leap, and just to have everything that increases damage and multipliers on that. And you can do that. It offers so much variety, and I genuinely do feel like they did a really good job in that area. I'd like to say that the majority of the skills that are available in this game are usable, and they're used in a wide variety of builds, whether it be Anomaly or whether it be Firepower. And you can see the clear-cut kind of split as to which ones are designed for Firepower and which ones are designed for Anomaly. Things like Technomancer, for example. You can go for a turret build if you really choose to and you fancy. You can go for Anomaly side on that and just trust that your turrets will do enough damage. You can increase the multipliers, you can increase the status power that each one will inflict, all that kind of good stuff. You can then quite easily just go for a toxic build that's of top tree Firepower, and you can do that's the meta build right now, and it always has been pretty much ever since Technomancer was fully released into the game. And you can do that, and you have there's 3 main skills for that, but that you can easily swap a tech one in. So things like Cold Snap, you can get rid of Cold Snap because you're not going for the full set of the Borealis, so you don't necessarily need that, but it is, it's a nice panic button. But you can easily replace it with Fixing Wave if you were just going to, you didn't want the crowd control, you just wanted the single target DPS, and you can put in things like the Cycle and the mod that gives you health regen when you activate Healing Wave. Healing Wave also benefits your teammates, so you become a little bit more support based. It's things like that. And then on the contrary, you can then swap it over to be a minigun build that uses shrapnel grenades and uses possibly the toxic turret that goes with it, and obviously you're using tools of destruction. And you're then able to increase your anomaly power to then do extra damage with your shrapnels, to then deal more damage with your minigun, and then you use your toxic turret to be able to refill your minigun so you don't die and you don't run out of ammo. It's it's a lot of variety, and that's just the Technomancer. There are anomaly and firepower builds that work really well with the Trickster. The Firepower doesn't necessarily work too well with the Devastator, and that definitely could do with some love and some definite fix. But the Pyromancer can also benefit from Firepower and Anomaly Power, so I'd say the Devastator's the only one that doesn't really fit into that category. It just kind of falls short, and that's something I'd like to change and mention in the quality of life. But overall, in terms of class, in terms of whether you want to go Firepower or you want to go Skills and Anomaly, you do have a wide range as to how you play. You do have a lot of freedom, and I think they got quite a nice balance going there. It could do with a little bit of tweaking, but overall, it is pretty damn good. When it comes to the design of the enemies and how they do their attacks, how they look, how the environments that are around them, the enemies are very varied and are very unique in design, and they also have crit points to be able to match that as well. You've got obviously your standard headshots for the humanoid kind of enemies. You've got some that actually have armor and plating across that crit point, which you then need to destroy to be able to make it so you can hit crits. You've got Moloch, who's got his crit point on his back. You've got some of the beasts, so the Alpha Phoros, their head is sometimes a bit difficult to hit, but obviously if you can hit that, then you're golden. And then you've got the Broodmothers that really mix things up, where the fact that their head isn't actually a crit spot, it's actually where their rib cage is. So it keeps you guessing. It's almost like a learning experience to be when you first play this, to try and find out where the crit spots are, how you're able to do the most amount of damage as physically possible, which ones take more or less anomaly pattern damage if you're going for that kind of build. It varies the way that you tackle each of the enemies, and the only thing I would say is the fact that as a small change, because in the majority it is pretty damn good, is the fact that when it comes to resistance against armor, the armor is so much higher, which makes firepower builds that don't use any kind of bullet skills a lot harder to be able to be used, but to be viable, compared to when you then swap over into a bullet skill or you're using anomaly skills. The resistance is so much lower, you're able to do a lot more damage. So the only thing I would say is to try and find a nice balance between that. I'm not saying they need to increase how much resistance each of the enemies has, but I think some of the enemies could potentially do with a little less armor, just to be able to make firepower builds without one of those bullet skills a little bit more viable. Now this one's going to be a controversial one because a lot of the comments that I was actually picking up from the previous video is the fact that people don't feel like the developers actually listen to the community and they don't take any of our feedback, and I genuinely do feel like they do. I feel like this is actually a pro for the game, and it's actually quite refreshing as to how often we hear from them, what they're currently working on, what they don't quite know just yet. We have so much information being fed to us from the developers every single week, and we really just take it for granted. I feel like that's mainly down to the fact that we're so impatient when it comes to, on a whole anyway, as to when new content's going to come out, when patches are going to go live, all that kind of thing. But we need to remember that these are a massive studio. We're not dealing with Activision here. We're not dealing with EA and DICE. We're not dealing with Psyonix and Epic Games, for example. We're dealing with one kind of studio that's released this massive game that's become so popular, and the team is only so many people deep, and they're able to, you know, every single week consistently come back to us to say, oh, I'm sorry, the patch has been delayed, or they're able to say, this is what we're working on, this is what we've got in mind, and then they listen to us in terms of what's not working, and I genuinely feel like the latest patch with the buffs was something that they listened to us about. They've took the data from the game, they've listened to the people playing the game, and they've done some really good work on that, and I genuinely feel like that's something that we need to be hyped about, and something that we should be happy with. So, you know, this is just a small part. I genuinely think it will get a little bit better as well in time, but the devs are genuinely taking on comments. They're taking on any opinions. You know, they're for example, there's going to be another point that I'm going to touch on for what I'd like to change in quality of life, which they've already kind of addressed. But that's for things like legendaries. You know, not everything is being used, not everything's being utilized. A lot of things are kind of garbage tier, and obviously purple weapons are going to be better than. So they want to make sure that legendaries are, you know, actual legendaries. You know, there's a rarity behind it, and they should be of a certain status. And, you know, they've listened to us on that. They want to sort that out. Things like additional content down the line. This was not going to be a live service game. They quite clearly said that this was going to be the finished product, and that is it. And they would support it with any kind of bugs, any kind of glitches, all that kind of thing. But they listened to the community when they bought the game, and people were so happy with how this turned out that Outriders People Can Fly, they turned around and they said, right, okay, we can do that, and they're working on more content because we asked for it. You know, it's only been 4.5 months. You know, I keep saying this point because we do need to remind ourselves of that. It's been 4.5 months since this game launched, and they found out that people really do want to see more of this game. You know, Square Enix quite happily jumped on and said they want to make this their brand new IP, like one of their main IPs, which is great news for the future of Outriders. But in terms of this actual game, People Can Fly have turned around and they're going to make some more content for us. We don't know what that content is quite yet. I'm going to touch on what I'd like to change in quality of life a little bit later on as to what I'd like to see implemented, but we can't say they don't listen to us because they genuinely do, and we've got proof to be able to show that they do as well. And lastly, I'm going to praise the game for how its endgame is handled, initially anyway. In terms of the layouts, in terms of all the different environments that they've included, all the different kind of elements, you know, it gets a little bit samey, obviously, if you keep playing Expeditions over and over and over again, but, you know, that's the same with any kind of game. If you play the same thing over and over, then you're going to get repetition, you're going to get a little bit bored with it. But in terms of the actual endgame itself, in terms of the difficulty scaling, in terms of the drop rates for legendaries now, back when it was before, I probably wouldn't have put this on my pros, but back what they've done now, and with the change and with the fact it's been doubled, it actually does reward you for taking on those higher difficulties, and the higher difficulties also have a nice challenge to them. It's not too difficult. If your build is right and you're going in the right direction, then you know you can still breeze through the expeditions. If you're not getting things correct, you've not got any kind of synergy or anything going, then yes, you're going to struggle a little bit, and you're actually going to have to rely on some other people. But that's fine because we've got the community for that. We ourselves do carries. We help out the community where we can. We've got a Discord that also does the exact same thing, and we're kind of small fry compared to other ones where they also have the exact same thing. They have the same experience. There's plenty of people on Twitch that do the same thing as well, for like Eye of the Storm or for any other kind of expeditions, and you know, the community really is there for the end game experience. And I have to say that maybe that's not for the devs. Maybe that's not a pro for them, and maybe that's a pro towards the community, but I genuinely do feel like that should be on the pros list, and that's something that should be commended. So yeah, I'm going to put it on one of my pros. So okay, you've heard about what I thought is great about Outriders. Let's have a look at what I think is, not so great. It's pretty bad, and definitely could do with some work, at least in my opinion. And some of these are going to be actual opinions that are out in the community, because I do actually share those with you. It's just sometimes I like to look on the optimistic side of things. So the first one, the elephant in the room, every single person's top list is going to have connectivity issues when it comes to matchmaking. Now, I know that they've done some work on this, and it genuinely has got better in time while they've actually been working through with the game, but it's still a long way from being perfect. It genuinely does need a lot of work, and it needs maybe some revamping. I feel like the current process they've got in place at the moment, where one person has to host and everyone else has to join that game, I don't feel like that's working, and they do need to find another solution, because things like skills, like the bullet restocking kind of mechanic, when it comes to like things like toxic lead, don't consistently work, in an online environment. There's other things as well, which we'll touch on in a little bit, to do with like skills not working as intended, but the main thing is things like that. So firepower builds, unless you're a host, do not work effectively when it comes to online. It needs a lot of work, and I do feel like that's possibly the first place they should start with that. So, it's a work in progress. It's, they were saying that they weren't expecting as many people to, come onto the game when it first started as they initially did. Maybe some of that's going to contribute to the fact it went free on Game Pass for Xbox, or Steam just saw quite a lot of sales just in general, and they just weren't expecting the sheer amount of number of people for day one. But they've had a bit of time. We should have a better solution, better position right from where we are right now, and unfortunately we're just not seeing it. So I do hope that it gets fixed down the line. I do hope that they come up with something better, or they find a way for the connectivity issues to kind of disappear. But that will always be top of my list, and I will always be a bit agitated about that. Another thing on my cons list is the fact that even though we get the communication from the developers, it genuinely does feel slow regarding updates and patches when they come rolling out. Now, I don't know the full ins and outs, I don't know the full process they have on their side, but it's all well and good telling us what you're working on, but if it's something small, why aren't we seeing smaller patches a bit more consistently? I mean, I don't know if they have to, pay to, or they have to schedule it with every single store to be able to have the update go live at certain points. I don't know. But what I do know is the fact that we're getting the communication, we know what they're working on, we know what's been, especially in the latest patch, we know what's been fixed, but they won't roll anything out until everything's done. Now, I understand the why, I understand the process behind it, it's not that I don't, it's not that I'm being ignorant, but in the same respect, for this patch we had to wait 2 weeks after they told us that everything was fixed apart from a random crashing error. Now, crashing is obviously a big no-no, and no one really wants to see that in any of their games, but if that's something that's already happening, you might as well roll out the patch and then roll in another patch to be able to fix the crashing if it's something that you're working on. I don't understand why they delayed everything as much as they did, unless there is some kind of financial reason that I'm just not aware of. So everything else has been decent, but it does feel like maybe it could be a bit quicker. Now, is this down to the fact that they don't have enough manpower to be able to deal with all the things that are wrong at this moment in time, or is it just because it's taking so long to be able to fish through the code to be able to find out what's causing these issues and be able to play test it and make sure it's correct and then roll it all out? I'm not too sure, but from our perspective, it does feel very slow regarding updates and patches, and I just wish that would, in time, I wish that would come out to us a little bit quicker. Now, another main one that's on my list is the fact that there are bugs and there are features in the gameplay that shouldn't really exist, and it really baffles me as to why they do exist. Things like when you activate a skill and it says no targets in range, that is a big one. That's one that I've had from Dan, constantly telling me in the year when he was playing a Trickster and he couldn't teleport. I've had it enough times when I'm playing a Devastator and I'm trying to do a gravity leap and there's no targets in range. Bullets stopped by dead enemies, so like carcasses and all that are on the floor, or even bushes. The fact that I can't shoot through a bush or some foliage is downright disgusting, and that shouldn't happen. I don't get why that is why that's a thing. Why can't things pass through that? If I'm able to run through it, why can't I actually send a bullet through it? And that baffles me to this day. That's been something that's been with me for 4 months. You know, and I know other people say the same thing as well. You know, if I was to say what winds me up the most, connectivity or the fact that I can't shoot through a bush, it would be the shooting through the bush. The fact that I have to try and place myself where strategically around bushes rather than actual enemies is just, it shouldn't happen, and I feel like that's the one that just can't be forgiven right now, and I feel like that one should be making its way onto a patch very soon. If there was anything out of this list, that's the one that will get me. But we've also got things like bugs where they're getting stuck in animations, and the other one that was kind of notorious was the fact that if you're as a trickster and you're not hosting and you do the teleport, you can then get stuck as a slow walk for the rest of the expedition. I don't understand how that kind of that connection kind of happens. I don't understand how the skill relates into you having a slow walk for the rest, and you can't do anything about it. You can still teleport if there's another target in range, but if you're slowly walking towards something, they're running away from you. You're never going to be in range again. So it just hampers and it dampens on the overall experience, the overall playing, and it's bugs that are so just so obvious like this that really affect how you feel about the game, and it's those kind of things shouldn't have made it to the main game when it got released. You know, that's something that should have been addressed in the demo. Maybe we should have had access to every single one of the skills just to be able to do some playtesting of our own. But if you don't pick up anything like that, and so many people are shouting about it, what happened? What broke down in the line for it to get to this point? And you know, okay, a lot of things can be ironed out with patches, but it's just the fact that we then have to wait for those on top of the fact that we waited for the game to be released. So I just feel like the game needed a little bit of testing, a little bit of bug fixing before it got released, and I feel like that's everyone's opinion, whether you love the game or whether you hate the game. It's the fact that it needed a little bit longer, it needed a little bit of time in the oven, and then it could have got released to pretty much the masses. Lastly, on my list of major cons, I do feel like, as something I've already touched already, but I do feel like a lot of the legendary gear isn't being used or just does not feel legendary status. I don't quite understand how, you know, it goes through a design process, and some of these things sound really good on paper. For example, you know, when I picked up my first body snatcher and I read the mod and I was like, oh, I could just, all I have to do is a firepower technomancer. It's literally just stand in the same location. I can teleport enemies just where I'm close. I don't need to move my cursor or anything like that. You know, it sounds great on paper, and then you get to it, and the fact that as you learn a little bit more and you start playing to be able to learn about other mods and all that, and then you discover things like Killing Spree and Dark Sacrifice, and you look at what the Body Snatcher does and you're like, oh, how is that in any way, shape or form even close to what I can do with either of those two mods? I mean, Embalmer's Rage is a great, it's as a choice of a mod, it's sometimes, most of the time, it's not as powerful as Killing Spree or Dark Sacrifice, but it's a great alternative. It really is. And so the fact that you've got those things that are on paper. You've got Fortress, which is also in the top tier bracket because it affects all damage rather than just bullet damage. And when you really look at the tier 3 mod selection, when it comes to the weaponry at the very least, you've got maybe 4 or 5 top tier mods of Moaning Winds, Killing Spree, Dark Sacrifice, Embalmer's Rage and Fortress. Everything else is either a utility mod or just does not see use whatsoever because it just can't stack up to those. And I feel like the main reason why that is because, one, we can only change one mod, but two, it might have been a case that 5 really good ideas came out. Those 5 were probably top of the list, and then they went, well, let's just take everything else from tier 2 and just make the cooldown shorter, for example, and then they just become utility, like inflicting bleed for a devastator. Instead of relying on one of your skills to be able to do it, you can just inflict it with your gun. It baffles me a little bit as to how they thought that was balanced, and I genuinely do feel like they need something on that. I feel like the tier 3 mods, you know, they're sought after. It's not just because they're guns, they're not just because they're legendary, but for the fact that they are the best tier mods that you can get, and these are the ones that you should be highly sought after. So, I don't know how you fix this, really. I feel like it's, you know, in terms of like a balance perspective, I can't really comment. For example, like the tier 1 bleed, the tier 3 bleed, for the fact it just refreshes every 1 second. It's not enough. It needs something more. Maybe something like inflicts bleed and then plus 50% bleed efficiency or something like that. Something that increases the damage that the bleed actually deals, and then all of a sudden you'll see a bleed devastator rock that, and possibly even choose that over Fortress, for example, because all the bleeds that they'll be inflicting will be making up for the damage that they're lost through Fortress. I'm not saying that's definitely the way that you should balance it. I'm just saying it needs something else on top of it. It needs an additional perk to it to be able to even compete with those things like Dark Sacrifice, Fortress, Killing Spree, Embalmer's Rage, Moaning Winds. Moaning Winds is the most unbalanced thing I've ever seen. The fact that we've got a reloading skill, which you can put onto all 3 guns, and you can watch Moaning Winds be affected by anomaly multipliers to hit things like... Well, I've personally seen consistent 2.5 mil Moaning Winds, but I'm pretty confident there's been much higher out there in the field, possibly even up to close to 10 mil. Why is that a thing? But then if I try and use Radiation Splash, I can't hit a mil with that. I don't understand how you've got something that's like that, and it's not completely balanced. And it either needs a rework, or it needs all the... It definitely does not need nerfing. That's the main thing. I'm going to reiterate this several times. It does not need nerfing. None of the skills need nerfing. Even though I find Moaning Winds to be absolutely ridiculous, it does not need nerfing. Everything else needs bringing up to that standard. And that's the way it should be done in this game. And if we see any more kind of nerfs, I imagine there will be more community backlash. And possibly even more people boycotting the game. So we definitely need more buffs, and I do feel like we need to direct it more towards the weapon and armor kind of categories as well. Touching on legendary gear in terms of armors, you've got things like Cannonball Set, which some individual pieces have some really good tier 3 mods, like Captain Hunter on the gloves. You know, that's a really good mod to have on quite a lot of builds. But the set bonus itself is unbelievably niche, and the set bonus when you put all the pieces on doesn't even match up. You've got things like max health, you've got anomaly power, and you've got firepower, if I remember right. So it doesn't even reward you for playing like a pure firepower build, because you're then speccing into other things. And then you've got like the death proof set for the Devastator that gives you a 90% cooldown reduction on Boulder Dash, which is great. It sounds amazing, but Boulder Dash is such a trash skill that even with the buff that's gone through, Boulder Dash still struggles so much, and unless Boulder Dash gets a buff, then the legendary set's going to be like terrible. It's going to be rare, and it's just not going to be used. So they need a massive rework when it comes to legendaries, and they have mentioned that they are looking into the lesser used ones, and I really do hope that something elevates these to, you know, meta status. So the last section that I've got for this video, it will be my things I'd like to change, or my quality of life section. Now these are going to be some points that I briefly touched on a previous video. It's going to have a little bit extra on top of that, but it's also things that I've seen the community asking for, things that I know that, you know, people other than myself have also been asking for, and things I'd like People Can Fly to actually be working on to be able to make this the best game that it could possibly be. Now I do have 7 points for this, so I'm just going to briefly touch on. I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did with the previous ones, just because I feel like the video is getting a little bit too long. So we've got things like endgame scenarios. So things that I would like to see are either more expeditions, but possibly to a bigger extent. Scorchlands is a great one because it has such a big timer, and it gives freedom to actually have a longer expedition, more enemies to be able to fight, higher damage, more playtime basically overall, rather than all the teleporting back and forth between expeditions. And it gives a nice little balance between the shorter ones like Boomtown and Chemplant, and then being able to do some of the longer ones like Scorchlands. So something like that, maybe even a bigger expedition, even if it's just the one to start off with, where it's similar to like a raid that's in Destiny 2, and it just allows more freedom to how we play rather than against the clock. and the most simple one that I could possibly come up with is Horde mode. And I've mentioned this on streams before, where instead of going against the clock, we're actually trying to last as long as physically possible against hordes of increasing enemies. And it could be a mixture between the alien life forms and the humanoid kind of enemies, and you have to be able to tackle all of them at the same time. And the more waves that you go through, obviously the higher the enemies, the higher the level you're tackling, and just the sheer amount that you are. So the idea is that we just go through as many waves as possible, similar to how we do Call of Duty Zombies, for example. I'd like to see something like that, where devs, even though they're not necessarily the quickest in times, but they would be able to hold their own, and this may be even the game mode that's designed for them, really. Second point would be to buff the lesser used legendaries and set bonuses. Previously touched on this in the cons, but yeah, things like Death Proof with the cooldown to Boulder Dash, Body Snatcher with applying potentially being able to apply debuffs, and I'd also like to see the pistols to be able to get to 99.4k firepower to match that of the primaries. Give us a reason to be able to use the pistols, make sure they're on a level playing ground. Little things like that. I'd like to see that rework come in time. Smaller things I'd also like to change would be to allow us to swap characters on the fly without leaving a party. This is basically the host is always stuck as that one particular class, and for example, when we do carry streams, we like to mix it up. We like to keep it fresh for ourselves, because obviously we're playing for a few hours, and we've got multiple characters that are able to do carries. So it'd be nice to be able to do that without destroying the party in the process. So just make it a little bit quicker to be able to go back and forth. We'd also like to allow favourite items. Or maybe even swap loadouts on the fly or between builds. So you can say, oh, this purple, I don't want to dismantle it, but you use the quick filter option on the bottom right. You could favourite it. It means it's taken out of those filters altogether, and you just dismantle anything that's actually marked as not favourite or marked as junk, things like that. Or being able to choose a specific, so you could have one firepower, one anomaly power build, and you can choose back and forth between anomaly and firepower. You click on that, it automatically applies all the gear. So something simple like that would be quite nice. I'd like to see. And following kind of on from that, I'd also like them to allow us to remove single points in the skill tree when we've got our build set up, rather than starting all over again each time, just so we can actually fine tune, we can tweak, and we can just make that build work to the best of our ability. I really hate the fact that we have to delete the whole skill tree when I've actually accidentally placed a skill point, or I can see one that could potentially work better after I'm doing all this testing. So I then have to try and retrace my steps to be able to find out what I did. It would just make my life so much easier, and I'm sure it'll make a lot of people's lives easier, especially when they're just ranking up as well, that we don't have to delete every single progress that we made in the skill tree. Just delete out the one that we don't want, like we're using right click, and then use our left click to be able to allocate the points again. My penultimate reason would be for connections to become more stable to at least the point where firepower builds are able to be reliable and use mods like Toxic Lead online and not be hosts. I think that's going to be a crucial one for me. The fact that we've got some mods that become dead when they're online, or just in general as well. Things like Grand Opening, we shouldn't be having to go back and forth between the mods not working and being working again. We shouldn't be having to look into those kind of bugs. But also, why is it that Toxic Lead doesn't work when it's online? Is it just for the fact that bullets don't register and we got a bit of rubber banding? I feel like those kind of connection issues need fixing, even if it's not to the point where everything is just 100% hunky-dory or anything like that. We definitely need to make sure that the mods are working. That should be the crucial side of things, that should be key point, and that should be priority number one when it comes to connection sides of things. And lastly, I want People Can Fly to give us a reason to use the lesser used skills like Reflect Bullets, Boulder Dash, Fixing Waves, Slow Field for the Trickster, etc, etc. There's so many other skills that are underutilized. I know in the recent patch they've buffed Reflect Bullets and it is kind of usable, but it's not usable in the sense of what it actually is. It's more set up for the fact that you can trigger your anomaly power an extra 45% if I remember right off the top of my head. Just activating that, instantly activating it back off, goes into your 90% cooldown, and then literally 1 to 2 seconds later you've got it back again, ready to be able to activate again. It's not used for the skill that it actually is, and I feel like that's a massive waste. So I'd like to see them buff these skills, make sure that we can actually have a way to use them, almost break them to the point of being, overpowered or anything like that. But give us a reason to want to use them, and then fine tune them from there. That would be my suggestion. So that brings us to the end of the video, and that wraps up my true feelings that I have for Outriders right now. Like I said, I know some of you were a bit iffish when it came to my positivity towards the game. Please take everything that I am saying with a pinch of salt, because at the end of the day, I genuinely do feel Outriders is in a position to be able to be great. I feel like it could be one of the best games I have possibly played, and it does have that potential in my eyes. And I'd love to see this game do as well as I'm expecting, and I know it needs a little bit of work, I know it needs a little bit of love, and I know some people are very hurt at the fact that we didn't get a full finished product, just polished and everything as soon as it came out, but I still stand by the fact that they are victim to their own success, and quite a lot of this could not have been predicted at the time, so I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, so they have the ability and they have the time and they have the my patience to show that they can fix it. And they are, if it gets to a point where it's like 6 months down the line and we're still no better off, then yeah, by all means, I would be a bit dejected. I would start moving on to other games, but I can see the progress is there. It's a little slow, but it is definitely coming along, and it just needs a little bit more time, and I'm happy to give that for the time being, because I genuinely am still enjoying this game. Even 258 hours on, it's still capturing my attention, and that's the main point at the end of the day. If you can say that you put 250 hours into a game and you're still enjoying it, then surely it is a good game. And that's my stance on the whole thing, and I understand everyone else has different opinions, but I'm entitled to my own opinion, and that is it. And so I hope you've enjoyed the list, and I hope if you've got all this way, then I applaud you for the fact that you've listened to me for this long. If you've skipped all the way to the end here as well, then fair enough, that's absolutely fine. The bullet points will be in the video themselves, so feel free to just read them yourself, even if you don't want to listen to me babble on as it would be. But I hope you've enjoyed. Feel free to leave a comment in the comments section. I will quite happily try and get through as many comments as I can. The last video did take about 3 hours of my time to be able to answer all of those comments that I did say I would do. So I will do my best to be able to get through some, but just know that I don't always have 3 hours of my time to be able to spare to try and answer. So just keep in mind I might be a bit slow in terms of responding, but not to the levels of people can fly when it comes to patching. So thanks so much. Remember to like, remember to subscribe, and as always, keep yourself safe, keep yourself well, and I'll see you all on the next video.